Jerry Sandusky is innocent until he's proven guilty, and we want to talk about it with criminal defense attorney Bernard Brody, who's with us. He represents clients accused of sexual abuse. And Mr. Brody, we're so glad to have you with us. When you've got a situation like this that is nationally known, what are your immediate concerns in terms of trying to get an image out there that, look, what you're seeing on the surface isn't all there is to this?
Well,
how do you do that?
As a trial attorney, you're concerned about your potential jury pool.
Right.
And so everything that you see on TV, you are assuming potential jurors in your case are seeing. And every story, every interview, every time that grand jury findings is quoted or documented, that's something that your potential jurors could actually be reading. And that's scary from a defense attorney's standpoint in this case.
Mm-hmm. Mike McQuarrie is the man initially who says he saw something between Mr. Sandusky and about a 10-year-old boy in the shower at Penn State back in 2002. Sandusky's attorney was talking about what Mike McQuarrie saw with Anderson Cooper. Let's listen to this, and then I want your opinion.
Okay.
I think McQuarrie saw Jerry in a shower with a kid, and I think, like a lot of people, you assume the worst. And he probably was caught off guard when he saw it. He probably didn't stay there very long, and he left.
So when you've got a guy like Mike McQuarrie, 28 years old, says that he saw Sandusky raping a 10-year-old in the shower, how do you counter that once you get to trial?
That's a good question. And what this comes down to is what's called witness perception. And we actually retain experts that will critique these witness accounts of what they saw. And what they look at is a couple things. One is whether or not this witness had a bias, whether or not this witness at the time he saw Sandusky maybe had already heard rumors about Sandusky. Maybe rumors were floating around that he was having inappropriate contact with children. And maybe that affected his perception of what he saw in that shower that day. He may have seen what could be just innocent, inappropriate conduct, maybe him just showering with a boy, maybe him hitting him with a towel, maybe him hitting him with his hand. But because of that bias that he had going into that perception, which only lasted probably a few seconds, he internalized that and believes that he actually saw molestation.
You know, I mean, this is over a 13-year span here that we're talking about, from the time of the arrest to these charges kind of coming to the surface, percolating and then coming to the surface. People are probably at home watching, but why would children, who are now, most of them adults, who say that they're victims, why would they bother to come out? What would a motivation be? Because that's a pretty humiliating thing to admit.
Well, from a defense standpoint, we have to look at it as, you know, there's a possibility that they may have some improper motivation. They may have a financial motivation. Especially, I would be very suspicious of the allegations that come out after this story broke. Especially with all of these alleged victims hiring lawyers, threatening multi-million-dollar civil suits. I would be very suspicious of what motivation a person would have now to come forward as opposed to maybe a couple years ago. The other thing is it's possible that these alleged victims believe they really were abused, but maybe not. Maybe they did have this inappropriate contact with Sandusky. Maybe they have memories of being in the shower with Sandusky. And then over the course of time, they internalize these memories, and they could create false memories, memories that now they believe that they were actually abused.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm wondering, when you've got an adult who says he saw this, and then you've got these children, none of whom, as we understand them at this point, none of whom know each other, but their stories all pretty much mirror each other, do you foresee a possible plea in a case like this? And what plea options might there be?
I don't think a plea is possible in this case, because any sentence that a prosecutor would want to recommend to Sandusky would be akin to a life sentence for him. And so this case is going to go to trial. Now, one thing I do want to point out that is a little dangerous to presume with the similarities of these statements is we are only seeing the end result. We're not seeing the series of interviews and the series of statements and the evolution of these statements over time. And the reason why that's important is because if, for instance, these alleged victims were all interviewed by the same interviewer, that interviewer now comes in with biases, and they could ask suggestive questions and leading questions to the other alleged victims to try to draw similarities between the accounts. So while we're seeing an end result with striking similarities, it may not be the way it started.
And of course, this case, we understand, may have inspired some people from Syracuse, a couple of kids from Syracuse now coming out and saying that Coach Fine abused them. That's one of the newest pieces of information coming out. It doesn't have anything to do, it's not related to this case, but in the Syracuse case, this is what I found interesting. The police told these two men, who are now men, they were ball boys at the time, they were younger, that the statute of limitations had run out. They couldn't really move forward with this. And I was sitting at home last night with my husband watching that and thinking of this case and thinking, why would there be a statute of limitations on a crime as... Look, at the end of the day, it's heinous. And any rational person is going to say that when you abuse a child like this. Why would there be a statute of limitations? And do you foresee something like that possibly going away?
Well, first of all, the statute of limitations is a fundamental principle in our criminal justice system. That goes back to the beginnings of our society here. Now, and the reason for it is because people in general shouldn't have to be looking over their shoulders for the rest of their lives, wondering if they're ever going to be prosecuted for some misdeed committed, decades ago. Now, the rules regarding the prosecution of child sexual abuse cases has expanded and become much more liberal over the last 10 years. And statute of limitations, in particular with respect to these cases, have become much more expansive and much more liberal. Now most states don't even begin counting the statute of limitations until after the child turns 18. Because they think that the child at that point now is of an age where now he can articulate whether something happened to them. So there are greater protections and much more expansive rules with regard to these cases. I expect in the future, it's very possible, especially now in light of these new allegations in Syracuse, legislators will now be pushing for maybe a moratorium on statute of limitations from this point forward in these cases.
Boy, that's interesting. All right. Hey, Mr. Brody, thank you so much. Bernard Brody with us. It's so good to get your perspective. Thank you for sharing. Syracuse University, we were just talking about it here, and I want to get you the very details on it. Here's the thing. Put a coach on the men's basketball team on